Thank you very much, and there we go. Just want to show you my two photos on here. Thank you to the Jockey Club. It's quite a nice little photo looking down from one of my staff members where she's staying, and the Walk21 taken from one of the walk shops, and my photos from JP Horay and Christine Finlay. So I'm here to set the agenda. This was the group that I was part of for 4 years, the IPCC committee that was looking at the what we do about climate change, particularly in our cities. And one thing about IPCC that's not understood, it is a voluntary organisation. It's a group of scientists who are chosen from around the world to be part of helping to set the agenda. And they've been working for 20 years on helping the world to understand this major problem that was not being addressed. And they've certainly done that. It's however been set, it's not an agenda set by governments. This is a civil society type group that has formed to alert the world to the problems. And it is a big problem, 80% less CO2 by 2050 that we have to do. This is not an agenda that can easily be put aside. And the context is that we're not getting anywhere near that, it seems. But when you look at the data there, where you've got greenhouse gases going up and up and up, out of control, coal and oil going up and up, it looks really as though we're totally out of control. And that really that global politics is going too slow. We're walking towards a low carbon future. We should be running or getting on a horse and riding through to the future. We need to be doing so much more. And it certainly seems pretty desperate. Is it out of control? Is it something that we have no show of achieving? I want to be a little bit more positive today because this year is historic. For the first time in world history, we can show that greenhouse gas is going down and global wealth is going up. Now, there have been times when you could say that emissions went down, but mostly it was because of a major global recession of some kind. So we are now showing what is the UN are calling decoupling. Decoupling means we can grow in wealth, decline in footprint, in the impacts of that wealth generation. And that's quite significant. So I want to quickly go through where this is happening and why, and perhaps understand what this means for our future. So to start with, how does change happen in general? And my understanding is there's three factors: the market, community, and government. And they have different roles. The market is very powerful in producing the goods and services that we need for everyday life, and therefore an everyday life with less carbon in it requires the market. Governments, they regulate, they create infrastructure, and they have a medium-term agenda, usually, whatever the election cycle is. And communities who set the long-term values and visions, the ethics, the morals. This comes from civil society, like the IPCC, like civic exchange. They create the agenda. And together, if you can get all three of these working on the same agenda, then you get change. So where is decoupling happening? Let me start by looking at a European country. Denmark, could be Germany, could be Sweden. And decoupling began in the 90s. And you'd have to say there was some definite government leadership here because it wasn't actually separating out. For about 5 or 6 years, it was hard going. And then we started to decline in these countries in both coal and oil, see them going down there, and yet wealth started to grow and has continued to grow. So the generation of opportunities for people has continued, and they are getting rid of coal and oil. So what about the US? The US are a bit slower in it, but the decoupling is certainly setting in, and now both coal and oil are declining and have so for the last 7 years or so. Australia, a little bit sharper in its growth, economic growth, and both coal and oil are declining. The coal in particular, for the biggest coal exporting country in the world, we are actually using less each year. India is an example of a country that is in a rapid growth phase. It is still going up in its coal and oil use. It could be the same in Indonesia and other emerging countries. But it is decoupling. You see that the relative growth is different. And so we can expect that they too will enter this phase where coal and oil will begin to decline. China, a very big contributor to greenhouse gases now. For the first time, coal use declined in the past year. And you can see there the decoupling is very clear. So you can say basically everywhere has begun this journey. Everywhere. Some considerably further down the track, and particularly in Europe. What about Hong Kong? Hong Kong, you can see, is decoupling. Very flat in the emissions per capita, and it's clearly something that is part of this international journey. But it's interesting, the data we have showing coal going up and down a bit and pretty much static or declining, but oil continuing to go up. And I've been asking the undersecretaries and so on to help me explain that, but it perhaps is something that we need to understand better. But let me say that it is still one of the most efficient cities in the world in terms of transport. Hong Kong is down here. That's the level of car use or the amount of fuel use from transport, so oil if you like, but these are the really dense cities of the world, and most Asian cities are here. The European cities are at this level here, then the Australian cities, and then the American cities right up to Atlanta and Houston up here, which have 103 gigajoules. This is about 4. So you can see dramatically different amounts of transport fuel use, and Hong Kong's one of the lowest. So why is it still growing uncoupled from GDP? Is it because the oil companies are saying we should all ride bikes? Maybe not. Is it because there's a lot more new roads that have been built? There's a lot of activity along the areas that are being filled in that enable it. 4% growth in car use, I've heard, which is pretty high. And however, it is still, with those figures of 90% getting to work by public transport, it is a very high quality transit linked in to the dense land use. And it has led the world in demonstrating how to do that. And most cities in the world now try to integrate transport and land use better. In the Hong Kong model, for example, the World Trade Plaza is part of MTR. They know how to do this integration. Is it winning on walkability? That's been the theme of this week, and everybody's doing workshops and walking around to try and assess that and understand it. With the different kind of walking facilities, particularly the upper leveled, and some of the events. I like this one. This is from the famous photographer, Minister or Secretary K.S. Wong, who gave me this last night. It is the best kind of vehicle in a walkable street. Could the walkability genie be further unchained? In most cities, it certainly is the case. Now, I want to try and help us understand that decoupling better and to see what we can learn from the data. Can we learn from coal for a start before we learn about oil? If you look at the factors that are causing this, first of all, energy efficiency is significant now. So in the UK, for example, and many places you can show this, for about the last 15 years, the usage of energy per household has been going down. They're getting wealthier, but they're using less. Sheer appliance efficiency, if you like, because in every area of household usage, it's getting cleverer. So we're getting smarter at how we use energy. But also renewables is taking off. It is worth understanding that the world's bankers made a decision about the future well before governments. Basically this week, the Paris Accord comes into practice. That's not what happened back in around the 2008-9 mark, when investment in coal and gas for power began declining and renewables took over, so that it is now double. This is Bloomberg energy data, and it's from around the world, and it shows a very positive future because renewables is taking off. So in their newsletter they say wind and solar are crushing fossil fuels. That's not exactly what you feel about the future at the moment, is it? But it is in fact happening. And this has come from the market themselves. The market for future energy is now shifting to renewables significantly. So what you see with this whole IPC cultural change that's happened across the world, joining with the markets are the ones driving this change. So renewable energy is becoming very significant in the future. Now look, my hometown of Perth, it's not exactly a place that you'd think was leading the world in anything really, but we had a boom in the economy recently, a mineral boom, and suddenly we were the wealthiest city in the world for about 5 years, and there was a lot of money around. So what did people spend it on? They bought rooftop solar, extraordinary amounts of it. So 25% of households now have rooftop solar. Now there was no government program, no subsidy, no education program to try and drive people into it. They just bought it. The market was operating because they had the money to do it. And the rest of the world was suffering from the GFC. So if you want to see what the future's like, you can go to Perth and see that there's a lot of people have put solar on their rooftops. In fact, the biggest power station in Western Australia is now rooftop solar. What sort of future? How quick did that happen? We were all taken by surprise. And the minister is now saying it'll go to 70% and they will never have to build another power station. This is an extraordinary future that's starting to unfold, and a better one. What has happened, of course, is that the coal assets are now stranded, and around the world people are recognising that that can happen. So the biggest coal miner in the world, Peabody, is now filed for bankruptcy. We have a series of projects, so this is WGV, is a project that is going to demonstrate the neighbourhood of the future. It's being built with solar and batteries built into it, because batteries enable a better usage of the solar and a better way to manage the system. And the whole place will be zero carbon, managed by a citizen's utility. That whole neighbourhood will be managed by their own apartment management system that will become the utility. This is the world that's emerging. and the cut-off point where solar and batteries is cheaper than coal-fired power stations is happening now. So this is the future we can look forward to. So what about oil? Because oil is what relates to walkability and the future of cities to decarbonise from oil. And how do we create walkable cities to make that happen? The reality is that if we make walkable cities, you certainly will create a better economy. It will be reduced in carbon as well. So it will help with that decoupling process. The transformation and the data on this is now coming from America, where walkability was not built into the structure of their cities until recently. And now we're beginning to see this transformation. There is a new book that we hope that you will be able to buy shortly, People's Cities, The Life and Legacy of Jan Gehl. Annie Matten, who's here, and myself put this together. Jan Gehl is an extraordinary Danish architect who brought to the world an understanding of walkability. He certainly has been to Hong Kong, but probably 50 cities around the world he has worked in. There are brochures and little memory sticks with a chapter that you can pick up outside. The processes that he unleashed were demonstrated very clearly in Melbourne, where he did studies in 1994 and then in 2004, and you can compare them and the difference in the city. The walkability of Melbourne has become quite legendary. More people living downtown. Look at that. New street trees coming in, all up and down the streets, and you can see it. If you go there, outdoor cafes, there was almost nothing in 1994. Now it's one on every corner. And the laneways have been brought back to life. So overall, significant increases in pedestrian traffic, pedestrian activity, and sitting around enjoying the city, which is what walkability is about. Now it's a better city. It's attracted a lot more capital into the investing community because they like to live there and work there. But it's also a lower carbon city. Even my own city, Jan Gehl did a study there, and the city has transformed. That's the other thing you can say about that boom time. A lot of the money was spent in creating a better, more walkable city. Even the main street has been narrowed and made better for walking and just sitting around having coffee. So why do people and businesses like this walkability? What is it? This is Portland, Oregon, where a new development has been put in around private light rail in the Pearl District, and it's typical of the rejuvenation that's happened in many American cities. The top 6 most walkable cities in the US have 38% higher GDP. 70% of the knowledge economy workers in Boston live in walkable areas. Knowledge economy workers are what cities want. That's the creative, innovative aspect of the economy that's really taking off. This is how you keep young people in a city. They want walkable areas. So how do they decouple? The main thing is that to understand is that the human connection needs walkable spaces. It's not just a branding thing, it's actually a physical thing. You need the space created to bring people together so they can meet and talk, get together and plan and create. This is the theme of the other new book, which I have, The End of Automobile Dependence, which is essentially that a new era is emerging, that Americans are driving less, Australians are driving less. Same year, 2004-5, it started going down, per capita driving, unpredicted by all the traffic specialists. Central London's, the traffic's gone down 19%. And it's mostly younger people. So the red there is the most recent data, and you can see in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, 40s, it's all reducing. Us baby boomers at the end there are driving more, but we're driving to our own funerals. This is what younger people are doing. They're on the trains and trams, on their social media devices, and interacting, and then coming together to do the knowledge economy kind of jobs that are around. So there's a lot of work now in America that's showing that cars are yesterday's devices. The young and the rich are leaving the guzzlers behind. Now, it's not just America. Let me show you the story of Shanghai. Extraordinary growth, extraordinary improvement in the economic opportunities of Chinese people through cities like this. Flirted with the American model, started building a few freeways, they all filled. There was extraordinary traffic that developed so quickly in these dense Chinese cities. So what do you do next? You build the biggest metro in the world in 10 years. 8 million people a day are now using this metro. So this is bicycle use. And it's a bit sad that it came dramatically down, but you can understand why compared to quickly getting around in a car. So everyone got a car and then bang, it hit the wall and started slowly declining, and now it's in decline. And the option of the transit system, the metro, is taking over. That's where the growth is now happening. And exactly the same in Beijing, which is a higher car ownership city, but you could see the same pattern happening. Decline in bicycle use, increase, and then decline in the car use as the various kinds, particularly the metro system, is going up. The future for Beijing, predicted by them, is to see this continue to grow. The transit growth up, car use down, and bicycle use also slightly down, but still higher than most cities. So what makes this walkability? Firstly, it's space, it's density, it's rail connections, and it's design. The space thing, this is probably the most important image I have. That many people in cars can get into 3 buses or 1 light rail. And it's the space that's created that creates these walkable, knowledge economy-based cities. And it's hard for traffic engineers to understand that because they're trained to build that and just create the capacity all the time for more cars. But that era is over. We have to now create that space. And the future is one of declining cars anyway. In most ways of thinking, there is going to be a reduction in personalised vehicles and an increase in automated mobility services as we share cars more and we do automated vehicles and so on. But let me just quickly go back to that. They could be automated vehicles driving along 1 metre apart without a driver, but it's still ruining the city. So I don't think automated vehicles are going to transform our cities. What will transform them is if we do that. Some cities are taking down freeways. There are 22 urban areas have removed freeways. And this is one that was talked about in the conference in Seoul, and everybody can see that that is better for the city and of great pride for the city. Density. Well, there are many dense Asian cities. This is Tokyo, and this is Hong Kong. It is walkability is built into the fact that you've got so many people around the streets, but density does reduce car use, as I showed before. Density can also be seen inside cities, not just comparing cities, but inside cities. Density also improves labour productivity, and that's why walkable cities are now attracting all forms of government and the private sector to say, let's do this. So our data is now showing density increases in all our cities. The 100 cities that we study, it's going up. And it's going up in the old walking cities and along the transit lines. This is where people want to live and work, so they don't need a car. The old car-based suburbs are struggling now. So if you look at London, for example, the walking city, the transit areas and the car-based areas are very clear in the data, and London's rejuvenation has happened back into the city. Now, most walking city areas are being treasured, regenerated, but we still have silly projects like this. This is in Calcutta where that awful accident happened, but it should never have been thought of. We shouldn't build these anymore. They don't belong in city centres. This is a beautiful walkable city. It should be treasured. So we need to respect the walking city, regenerate it, and the market and culture want it more than the auto city fabric. All Australian cities are coming back in. If you look at that data there, it shows that the big growth is back into the inner areas. Rail connections are obvious, and now we're finding that in the cities that decouple most, their car use and their GDP are growing faster in GDP. So global growth is now in rail. 82 Chinese cities building metros, 51 Indian cities, all the Middle Eastern cities. This is an extraordinary era of rail. And America is mostly going for light rail. You can see the big increase there. It is in fact cheaper, and I can show you that data. This is the new light rail that's going into Sydney, and you can see that it doesn't have a catenary overhead wires because it's got lithium-ion batteries in it, in the same way that we're having in our households or our electric vehicles for Formula E. This is the technology of the future. So you will find that light rail will rejuvenate most areas and can be built into new centres in outer suburbs as well. Finally, design at the street level, because in the end it comes down to a lot of detail. This is Broadway in New York, which has become much more walkable. And some of the American cities, they were awful places in their city centres. They were unsafe. There was real decline had set in. Denver is a city that's rejuvenated around its rail projects. Its intricate design of the city centre now is happening in a way that is bringing capital and people back into the city. In my own town, pretty much the same thing happened once we saved the railway and brought it back. That's me in 1979 running the campaign to save the railway, and it has been very politically important and also significant for the future of the city, because we're getting walkable town centres built now around these centres, these rail lines. We want to build new rail. We want to build centres out into the suburbs, like most cities, the polycentric city. The key thing is how to fund it, and we've worked out a way, we think, called the entrepreneur rail model. It's actually based on the Hong Kong model, the MTR system, and how you can do that in a way that enables private capital to be brought in through land development. And most cities are now trying to do that because governments don't have the money they did. So the key thing from this is to say there is a market for walkable cities that will drive oil out, just as there's a market for solar that's driving out coal. And if you look at in Florida, you'll see a private rail that's being built with land development opportunities around the town centres, the stations. These are walkable city centres. They're integrated into the rest of the rail system, and it's entirely being built with private sector money because there is a market for it. They want to build walkable centres. They want to build the rail that makes it happen, and therefore you can say that with both markets, culture and governments all wanting solar and wanting walkable cities, we can expect very rapid change. to take over our cities. So this is the future. See it before your very eyes. You can see CO2 going down, 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 GDP continuing to go up. As renewables takes over, coal disappears first, then oil, then gas. 80% less by 2050, no problems. Thank you very much.